Now that we've looked at ideas in general, parts 1 and 2, you'll notice that part 1 was in book 2, chapters 1 and 2, and then part 2 of ideas in general was 9 to 12. So we skipped over a number of chapters. Why is that? Well, I wanted to put together the 2 videos that looked at ideas in general because it forms a little bit more of a continuity. In the chapters that we skipped over here, one of which is chapter 8, it's a bit of a digression, but it is a very important one, and it's one that people often get wrong, but it is one that has played a very important role in the history of British empiricism, and that is the question of primary and secondary ideas and primary and secondary qualities. So, I'm making a video just on this to try and make sure that this is nice and clear for you guys. First things first, we got a number of distinctions to make. Second, you got to keep the distinctions straight in order, third, that you can keep Locke's discussion intelligible. And it is intelligible, but it won't be if you don't keep these distinctions straight. So what's the main distinction that you have to remember? The mind and the object. Mind and object. Ideas in the mind, qualities in the object. Do not forget that. If you make a mistake there, the rest of this will just be gibberish. So, we're now introducing a new distinction though. So keep this in, right? Make sure that you have that retention, that you can call it up whenever you need it. We're introducing another distinction, the primary-secondary distinction. How does that fit with this? In a nutshell, you're going to have ideas in the mind, ideas. Ideas of primary qualities, ideas of secondary qualities. Ideas of primary qualities and ideas of secondary qualities in the mind. Qualities are in the object. You're going to have primary qualities and you're going to have secondary qualities. They're in the object. So what we're relating are these. That's the whole point of my discussion here, is to unpack what these are and how they relate. Now, the mind has faculties. We've seen that. First faculty, perception. And you have to, now, and faculties of retention, etc., discerning and all that stuff. Faculties are powers. We've seen that, right? It has to have a power. It's a capacity to do something, to perceive, or to recall, or to contemplate, or to abstract. Mind has loads of powers. Bodies have powers too. This is an old notion in philosophy. Bodies have capacities. They can do stuff. Bodies are not completely inert. They can cause things to happen. The sun has a capacity. Why? Because if the sun is shining, it warms a stone up. The stone must have some passive capacity to be warmed up, and the sun has an active capacity to warm things up. So, as I said, this does not have a capacity to learn. It cannot perceive things, but it has other kinds of capacities, like not being good for the environment. Oh, this is an eco cup. So maybe we hope that this has the capacity to not harm the environment. Things like that. So objects have capacities, or better yet, powers. Powers, Locke will call qualities. Remember, this case of powers are qualities, and these are in the object. So don't confuse these distinctions. If you do, you'll never get this stuff. Keep it all straight. It's actually not that difficult, but you've got to keep it straight. Now, external bodies have powers to cause ideas in us. We've been talking about this all along. Body hits up against the world, the body gets ideas. External objects have the power, the capacity to cause ideas in us. Now we're just looking a little bit more into what's going on in the external world, what's going on in the idea world, how do they relate? We're just digging in a little bit more, that's it. So remember, external bodies having powers, those are qualities. Let's go back to our apple example. I talked about this in a previous video. We have a lovely apple here, and we're assuming, for discussion, that it's red. So there are basically, in the apple, the external, the actual apple itself, no funny business here, just the apple, it has qualities and powers. Well, it has and I just labeled them, Q subscript red. That's going to be the quality to produce the idea of red in us. So that is a power. Q red is a power in the apple. Over here, here's the observer's eye, here's the mind. Well, Q, red, produces idea of red. So we have an idea of a power, an idea of a quality, in more particular, the idea of the quality to produce the idea of red in us. So you have powers over here, ideas of them over here. Qualities over here, powers, ideas over here. Keep that straight. Well, the apple has a bunch of these kinds of qualities or powers. They're interchangeable here. It has the quality sweet. That is, it's a quality or a power to produce the idea of sweet in us. So you bite into the apple has the capacity or the power to make you taste sweet. So again, it's a passively received idea. It's an idea of sensation. Simple. A little bit more advanced, though. The apple also has a power to produce the idea of shape in us. And in this case, it's round. So it has this quality, this ability, this power to produce an idea of shape in us. Okay, so far so good. We've got ideas of qualities and in the mind, and idea and qualities in the object. What about this primary, secondary thing? How does that work? What's going on with that? So far, I've just talked about qualities and ideas of qualities. Locke introduces this primary, secondary distinction by asking this question. I want you to reflect. What qualities does every object have to have? In other words, if you took that quality away, you wouldn't have an object anymore. Well, could you have an object that doesn't have the quality of, or the power to produce the idea of redness? In other words, it's green, right? Doesn't have, or blue, or it's like this. Well, that's white. It doesn't have the quality of producing the idea of red in us. It has the idea, it has the quality of producing the idea of white. So could you have a lack of certain qualities? Yeah, sure. So lots of qualities may not be necessary. They're just accidental. In the history of philosophy, philosophers have always asked questions like, what are necessary properties for things? And that's when they ran off and started talking about essences. Locke is doing much like that. What are the necessary qualities for an object to have in order for us to think of it as an object? Well, these qualities that an object must have, Locke calls those primary qualities. Those are base qualities. Is the quality of producing the idea in red in us a primary quality? No. Is the quality of producing the idea of sweet in us, the Q sweet? No. You have lots of objects that are objects and they're not sweet. You can have lots of objects that don't have any taste whatsoever. So even the quality of producing taste in us, that generic, that more broader quality, that's not necessary either. So you could have colorless objects, you know, translucent or transparent, that's fine. You could have tasteless objects, odorless objects. You can see where this is going. All of a sudden it's like, yeah, a lot of the things that I identify, like with smelling and tasting and some visual stuff, those don't seem to be necessary. No, Locke's saying they're not. They're in a sense, they're there. We'll unpack that. But they're not necessary for the object to be an object. So Locke will say, okay, you know what? Qualities like red and sweet, they are not necessary. What about shape? Yeah, Locke says that's necessary. Not any particular shape. Can you have a non-round object? Yeah, a cube. Can you have a non-cubic object? Sure, certainly, a cylinder, whatever. Think about this. Can you have an object that's an independent object with no shape whatsoever, right? That doesn't turn into a mode or something like that, like a somersault or a baker's dozen in the abstract. But can you have a really existing object out there that has no shape whatsoever? It might be a wild, contorted thing. It might not fall into any shape that you could readily identify, but it has no shape in any which way. Locke says, no. That is a primary quality. Objects must have some kind of shape. In other words, objects must have the quality of being able to cause an idea of shape in us. So in that sense, what qualities must an object have? Those are primary qualities. The quality of shape. Quality of size. So there's going to be some very basic notions in here of certain qualities that something must have in order for us to even say it's an object. So those necessary base qualities Locke calls primary. Not surprising. They're base. They're primary. The other ones, so the qualities, so what qualities are accidental to an object? Locke will then say, well, the ones that aren't necessary, the ones that something could, an object could have and still be an object. It might not be that particular object, but you certainly could say you could have an object that does not have any color. It's clear. Well, so these qualities Locke calls secondary. Okay. Primary qualities and secondary qualities. So, these ones that we already talked about that you could get rid of and you'd still have an object, these ones, like this, those are secondary qualities. And this is going to be a primary quality. All right, so that's Locke's basic distinctions. Now he just puts a few finishing touches on it. So the base qualities are the primary qualities. The accidental ones that, you know, don't have to be there, they can come and go, are secondary. But of course, we do have ideas of sweetness, ideas of red, and ideas of round, and ideas of shape. So we have ideas of those primary qualities. They correspond to the primary qualities in the object. We do have ideas of secondary qualities, red, sweet, and they correspond to the secondary qualities in the object. That's it. That's all we're talking about. So keep that all straight. Now, what's the last thing that Locke adds that's important to him? It's something he does not really explain, and it's something that he does not really defend. But it is, it's very important. He says that ultimately, which ideas resemble which qualities? So in other words, when you're experiencing that apple and you're getting all the ideas, which ones, now the question is not which qualities must an object have. The question is now, which ideas actually represent, as opposed to just merely being correlated with, which ones actually resemble or represent qualities. Okay, that's a little bit more of a subtle question. So the question is this: which ones actually represent qualities? In other words, by represent, Locke is really talking about resemble or look like, if you want a more colloquial expression. And Locke is going to say, well, you know what it is that when you experience this apple and you have an idea of shape, that actually resembles the primary quality of shape. So, which ideas? Actually, the ideas of primary qualities. So, that's Locke's answer. So before we look at why, get it straight. Which ones actually resemble? Here, ideas of primary qualities, they resemble. So here you have these resemble. So the ideas of a primary quality resemble the primary quality itself. The idea of a secondary doesn't resemble. But the secondary quality still causes the idea of a secondary quality, but it doesn't resemble it. We're used to causation, causing things that aren't resembling. I can cause something, and I can clap my hands, cause something cause a reaction in you. But the reaction in you, when I do this, doesn't look like my hands clapping. It's a sound, right? So you have an idea of my hands clapping, which is caused by my hands clapping, but you wouldn't say that the sound of my doing that resembles what I'm actually doing. No, but it's caused by it. So get that straight. So you can have a secondary quality being a power that can cause an idea of that secondary quality, but it doesn't look like it. It doesn't resemble it. And when you can get your head around the idea that this primary quality both causes the idea of the primary quality and the idea of the primary quality resembles the idea of the primary quality resembles the primary quality itself. So all it is just some terminology to get straight. If you have to get it straight or you'll never understand this, and Locke will seem hopelessly confused. And he's not. You just have to keep these things separate, starting with this basic distinction. So Locke then says, okay, so in the apple you have the primary and secondary qualities. Okay. You have ideas of primary, ideas of secondary. So these are secondary, and this is primary. Primary qualities, those are necessary. Those are like the quality of shape and size. Secondary qualities, not necessary or accidental, as we say. Last thing. Locke wants to say, at the end of the day, in nature itself, what we really have are just ultimately primary qualities. In the end, that's all that's really, really there. What you want to think about is another step up of combinations of things. What is a secondary quality? Let's go back here. The secondary quality, remember, it produces the idea of a secondary quality. So the quality of red produces the idea of red. The quality of sweet produces the idea of sweet. The idea of red does not look like the power, the quality of red. The idea of sweet does not look like the quality of sweet. Locke says one of the reasons for that is that ultimately what's causing everything that's going on are the primary qualities. If you take the primary qualities, Locke says, in certain arrangements, that cluster will give you a secondary quality. So secondary qualities really are clusters of primary qualities, and that cluster of primary qualities causes an idea of a secondary quality in us. So that cluster of primary qualities, call that cluster a secondary quality, and it is that complex cluster that we call a secondary quality that causes the idea of the secondary quality in us. So secondary qualities really are clusters of primary qualities. Right? They're just organized. So, in other words, for Locke, when you really start breaking all this down, the apple really only contains primary qualities. That's what nature is full of. Primary qualities. And sometimes we see those primary qualities. They resemble. And sometimes we see clusters of those primary qualities. And that gives us an idea of a secondary quality. And that doesn't resemble what's going on. So you have to memorize this and get this straight. Now you might think, oh my God, what's he doing this for? It's very simple. Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton's science was extraordinarily powerful. It comes out like a juggernaut, destroys all scientific systems, destroys Descartes. But Isaac Newton's system and this powerful thing called science only works with these. It simply assumes that that's nature, nothing else. Nature is composed of objects that have primary qualities. So Newton says, that's all I need, and I'm going to build this monstrously powerful system that's going to tell you ironically, why an apple falls, why the tides work on Earth the way they do, why the moon goes around the Earth and the Earth ultimately goes around the sun, how I can predict where planets will be, all kinds of enormously powerful stuff. And nature is just full of primary qualities. Everything else has to be built out of primary qualities. Locke takes up that challenge and says, okay, I'm going to show how we can have the experience we do, which is not just of primary qualities, but, you know, full of sweetness and senses and smells and all these kinds of things that can't be incorporated into science. Locke is going to say, I'm going to show you how we can have this and still have a fundamental epistemology, a fundamental structure of the mind that conforms and works with science. So this notion of compatibility with science is ultimately driving Locke's program. And he says at the beginning that Locke speaking, he says at the very beginning of the essay, the philosopher is just an underlaborer, just working to clean up after the scientist. The scientist carves out this giant, powerful statue, and the philosopher comes along and kind of cleans up the mess below and says, this is how philosophy fits in with science. So we're now quite a bit away from Plato, because now philosophers have to deal with an enormously powerful system on the planet, namely science. Plato didn't have to deal with that. A little bit of math, that's about all he worried about. But he didn't have a powerful system like Newtonian physics to deal with. So there you go. There's the picture that's going on in chapter 8. Read through it carefully, but this gives you, shall we say, a survol, a bird's eye view, an overview of all of it. But it all starts with making sure you absolutely get this distinction right. If you don't get that right, none of this will make any sense. Okay, so that wraps up the bit on ideas in general, and now a very important one. We're going to look now at a very interesting application of all this epistemology, all this Lockean machinery. That's a subject for another video. Stay tuned.